I'm going to introduce you. And then once we're done that, we'll just get on with the fireside chat. So, all right.
Let's go.
Okay. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Jeff Bullis Show. Now, today we're going to be meeting with and having a chat with Jon Ferrara from Nimble. Now, John and I have known each other for quite a few years now, and we've sort of bumped into each other, and we've been for walks down to Santa Monica. But first, a little bit about Jon. And Jon's a pretty fascinating character. He's a serial entrepreneur. Now, people that run multiple businesses seem to have something special, and that's what Jon does have in spades. He's also a noted speaker about sales, social, and marketing. He has reimagined CRM by building Nimble, the simple CRM for Office 365, and also for the G Suite. Now, Jon is best known as the co-founder of GoldMine Software, one of the early pioneers in the customer relationship management for small to medium-sized businesses. And GoldMine was the earliest products in the space between collaboration, contact management, and Salesforce automation, way before Outlook and Salesforce existed. So welcome to the show, Jon. It's so good to have you here, and look forward to actually diving a little bit into your story and sharing it with our listeners.
Jeff, I really appreciate the opportunity to have a conversation with you about how we together might inspire and educate others about achieving their dreams in life. Because I think that that's why we're on this planet. After selling GoldMine, I went on my own spiritual journey, and I came to the conclusion that we're on this planet to grow our souls, and we do that best by helping other people grow theirs.
Yeah, and that's one thing I really admired as we've had conversations and chats over the years as we've walked and talked, whether it's at a conference or whether it's been near your home in Santa Monica in LA. And it's one thing that's really impressed me about you is the fact that you value relationships so much. And I think I was reading a little bit about you saying you put the R in CRM. I thought that was actually pretty fabulous. And watching you over the years as you connect people and double down on being human is what I've really admired about you. So let's have a little. So what inspired you basically to start a CRM company back in the early 1990s when CRM actually wasn't even an industry? So you're actually one of the founders of the CRM industry.
Well, Jeff, I think that we all stand on the shoulders of giants. And I think that growing up as a young boy watching NASA put things into space really inspired me to reach for the moon, so to speak. And then my uncle was actually part of the space program. He helped invent radar and microwave at MIT, had his own aerospace company, and I kind of wanted to be like him. I didn't want to be like my dad, who was the #1 car sales guy in the country, first with Lincoln Mercury, and then he had his own Subaru dealership. And I sort of just put my father, just like he's a car salesman. And so I wanted to be an astronaut. So I studied computer science. Okay. But getting through my degree, I had to pay for my college. So I got a job at a computer store because I knew about computers. I bought the first computer really in my whole city back in 1978. Sorry. And so, so I found that I was actually good at sales. It came naturally to me. And, but I didn't want to be in sales. So when I graduated with my degree, I went and worked in aerospace for a couple of years and worked at a startup for a couple of years. And it was at that startup that they put me in sales after a while. And in trying to build relationships with leads and prospects at scale, I found it difficult to manage the contacts, to manage the follow-up and follow through. And I looked for a tool that would help me to manage contacts, and I couldn't find a relationship manager. I found WordPerfect Office, which was network scheduling and email. And I found a sales pipeline program, but what I really wanted was something that integrated email, contact, calendar, and sales and market automation. I couldn't find it. So at 29 years old, I was too young and dumb to know any better. I quit my job and started GoldMine.
Okay. So you did this with a partner. So Jon, you did this with a partner, and tell a little bit about how that relationship happened.
Well, Jeff, I think you know how hard it is to start a business.
Yep.
Right? Nobody hands you anything. And a powerful, especially if you pick somebody who is strong where you're not and you're strong where they're not. And so in my first, when I first went to college, in my Calc 1 class, there was this Israeli kid fresh off the boat from Israel, cocky as all get out, and smart as a whip. And so we started to study together, and we basically took Calc 1.
Right, we're having some problem with the sound here, John, and video.
When I went to go work in industry, he asked me about what he should do, and I basically helped him get his first computer and get DBase, and he became really good at programming. And so when I went to go start this company, we did it together.
Right. Okay. So essentially, so he had the technical skills and you had the sales skills. Is that?
You know, what's funny is I have a computer science degree, and I do have technical skills, but I think that my product and knowledge and my sales and marketing skills were definitely what was key to building the company, and his programming skills, because he was able to whip our first rendition of GoldMine out in literally months, and was our primary programmer for the first 5 years. So we didn't even have a development team. He was it. And he would, we'd go walk on the beach, I'd share ideas with him, and he'd have new code and new features for me the next day. And I went and sold the crap out of it.
Right. Okay. So in terms of what were some of the biggest challenges you had after you had the inspiration, you saw a problem that needed to be solved, you teamed up with your partner, and what happened was you're starting out, right? So what were some of the challenges you struck along the way, John, that you had to overcome?
I think the biggest challenge for anybody who has an idea and builds a product is bringing it to market, is getting it sold. And I tried to go sell it direct, and there's only 8 hours in the day, that maybe 10, maybe 15 if you're crazy. And you can only sell your hours, 24 hours in a day. And so what I did is I identified the influencer of my prospect, the person that sold the end user, the network. And GoldMine was essentially a networkable business application. It ran on top of the network. So I cold called all the Novell resellers in the country, and I got them to use it, because people sell what they know and they know what they use. They started to use it. They started recommending and reselling, and every Novell reseller had 100, 1,000, 10,000 customers. And so that's how we got to our first 100,000 or so a month in revenue, is by identifying the influence of our prospect, building a relationship with them, and then leveraging their relationship with their customers to scale.
Yeah, and that's what's I found really great about your story in terms of how you did it tactically and strategically, is that you were working originally for a couple of years for Banyan, weren't you? Which basically was doing a lot of direct sales.
Yeah.
And then you had a competitor that ran you over. That was Novell. Okay.
Yes.
So, and Novell had the distribution.
Yes. They had the resellers, the local resellers.
Yeah. So that's what's really great to hear, is that you said, okay, so how can I get a one-to-many relationship happening as quickly as possible? Who were the influencers, in other words, distributors at that time? We didn't call them influencers back then. We called them distributors. And you actually went and worked with them. So how quickly did you scale then? Like once you identified that, how long did it take to sort of get things really moving?
I'd say that whole cycle was 2 years or so. Let's say 1990 to 1992. And I don't know exactly what year Windows came out. Was it 93-ish? So essentially what happened was Windows came out, and Microsoft hired my former boss at Banyan, Jim Alchin, and he built NT Server, SQL Server, and Exchange Server, and Microsoft kind of ate Novell. And the thing is about Microsoft is they don't innovate, they iterate. They wait for somebody else to build the market, and then they come in when it's big enough with their muscle, which is billions of users and hundreds of thousands of hours, and they build a good enough product and they eat the market. And so they started to eat Novell at the same time that our customers grew from individuals and teams of 2 to 5 to individuals and teams of 5 to 500. And so our customers wanted a more scalable back-end database. Ours was DBase. And Microsoft wanted to sell SQL Server. So it was a perfect relationship. So we built GoldMine Enterprise, which required a seat of NT Server, SQL Server, and Exchange Server for every seat of GoldMine. It enabled our customers to scale to larger databases and enabled our partners to make more money on products and services. And we helped Microsoft sell its crown jewels. They pushed the crap out of us to all their distributors. And that's how we got to $100 million in revenue, is by becoming strategic to Microsoft's product line.
So was that because of the relationship you had with the guy from Banyan that moved to Microsoft?
No, actually, that relationship I didn't really call on.
Okay.
It was really a biz dev relationship that happened. We were a market leader, and Microsoft reached out to us and asked us to help them sell Small Business Server, and we were just intelligent enough to take that call and to do that integration. But I don't think that I would have really been able to make these kinds of decisions without really the sum of my experiences through all the different roles that I was in. So I think it's important to point out that each of the different jobs, each of the different roles that you have add up to the sum of your experience, which you bring to bear on situations as you grow.
Yeah. So you're starting to scale now. You've got distribution through Microsoft. Novell's been run over, as you said, by Microsoft. So from then on, I suppose the challenge for you in that space would be managing, I suppose, a fast-growing company. So how did you manage the people and teams within that?
Well, before we get to the operational thing, which is a really great question, because I think as an entrepreneur, you have to make a decision where to focus your time and when to bring on new people. But really what helped us to become a market leader was taking that whole idea of the influencer of our prospect. We started with the Novell reseller, and then going to the next level, which was editors and analysts and magazines and publications. So we needed to, once the Novell resellers had already sold GoldMine to their basic customers, they asked us for leads. How do you get your channel leads if you don't know anything about advertising? And so what I did is I contacted the trusted advisor of my prospect. Where do they get their technical and business knowledge? It was from places like PC Magazine and from Entrepreneur Magazine and from Inc., etc. And I picked up the phone and I contacted the writers and I said, how can I help you write more stories? They said, tell us stories about how people are using business technology to grow. So I started telling them stories and they started telling those stories. And that's how we got more print and more awards than all the other products combined. It's more powerful when other people talk about you than when you talk about you. And when you identify the trusted influencer of your prospect, i.e. these writers and analysts, that's what really put us on the map. And winning, 6 PC magazines in a row over, 7 years, I think it was critical to us building that brand. So as we scaled, in answer to your previous question, operational things began to be more difficult. And back in the old days, and I could even share a picture with you, I used to shrink wrap boxes, right? And manually put together this stuff. And at a certain point, you need to start building that stuff at scale because we were selling millions of boxes. And so how do you do that at scale? And so I went and found a CFO, COO, who'd been running one of the larger technology companies in Los Angeles. It was called Clipper. It was a D-based compiler. And so, I saw that they're running really efficiently. They were selling millions of boxes through distribution. So I brought him on board and I turned over to him all the accounting, all the operation, and even the success team. And so Rob Clark was able to take that on and really scale us, because as we brought on 10 global distributors, we had to mass manufacture product, drop ship it to the distributors. And then as we scaled from 30 people to 300 people, things become more difficult to manage. And I was able to focus on what I do really good. And I'm a storyteller. So being able to spend my time building relationships, telling stories, and focusing on the product really helped us to scale and win.
So what you did is you concentrated on what you were good at, what your superpower was, which was relationship building and storytelling, and
Yes.
making clear that you said, I'm not going to be an operations manager. I'm not going to be the CEO or COO. I'm basically going to keep doing what was the secret to success. So everything's scaling. It's great. So what happened, like I remember actually using GoldMine back in the 1990s, along with some other products. I think one was ACT as well, which was in Australia. I remember using it to do fax broadcasting, loaded up. So when faxes actually were a thing. So what were some of your major competitors that you'd beat off?
So like you said, there was ACT, there was Maximizer, there was Telemagic, there were a few other programs. I think there might have been 50 different programs out in the marketplace, but we were number one. And then the market started to shift to a more of a mid-market CRM. So they were more, people took sort of the idea that we did with GoldMine and they started to build the next generation of products. But the thing that people loved about GoldMine and ACT is they were relationship managers. They were contact managers at their heart. And what the next generation of CRMs weren't really about relationships and empowering the customer-facing business team member. They were more about reporting and management. And so I like to say that the CRM, the R stands for relationships, but these days it stands more for reporting. So this next generation of tools like SalesLogix and Pivotal and Onyx were more mid-market, more expensive, management-facing reporting platforms for lead flow, which is required as you get to be, a bigger company. But we really focus on the still really our core relationship management features, still serving that sort of work group market. And so I think that there's a space in the individuals and teams of 5 to 25. That's like a sweet spot in the marketplace that wasn't being served. We were getting up into the 5 to 500 with a lot of large banks and stuff. But yeah, definitely the amount of competitors started to grow, but we grew with it. We got to about $100 million in revenue the year we sold it, and we made that decision because, Jeff, you have to sort of, when you run a company for 10 years and it's extremely successful, you have to say to yourself, how much is enough? Yeah. And what is important in life? Yep. Most people work their butts off until they're 65, and then they choose to spend some time living life. And I think that we have that all wrong, Jeff. I think that we really need to live life now because we don't know if there's a tomorrow. And so after having my second baby, I made that decision that, enough was enough. And we didn't have any investors. We never took any bank loans. So the majority of the shares were closely controlled by the founders. And so we sold it in 1999 for cash. I didn't really like the stock market valuations that I was seeing, and I insisted on cash. And I sold it to a South African gentleman. And I stayed on for the obligatory year. And then I went off and spent 10 years raising 3 babies. And I'll tell you what, Jeff, I learned more about relationships, about myself, about my soul in that period of time of being a present father and husband and member of my community than I did in the previous, 10 or 20 years of doing business.
Yeah. And that's one thing I've really admired about you too, is that I think it's the human aspect of the business that and also to life. And sure, you worked, your bum off, really, in terms of getting the business running and rocking and rolling. But you actually realized what was important and said, this is enough. How much more do I need? And I think the reality is it's research shows that after you're earning $75,000 a year, that your happiness doesn't increase by more money. It actually comes down to a lot of other interesting things, such as relationships and experiences.
Jeff, I want to put an image in your head. Do you remember the movie? What was it called? Christmas Carol.
Yep.
Do you know Marley's ghost, the one that shows up in the night?
Faintly.
So Marley's ghost is the guy with all the change on him, and he's just hovering over Scrooge, and he's saying, "Look at me, look at me." And I think that all the stuff that we surround ourselves, all the crap that we buy and stuff in our garages and our closets and the houses and the cars that we buy are like the chains around you, and they can suffocate you. And I think that less is the new more.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. The thing about stuff is that it ends up owning you.
Yeah.
You don't own it. And all around that anxiety, I remember a story, a friend of mine when I was studying at and teaching, which is my first career. And it was interesting. So my room buddy at the time in our first year of teaching, and we were sharing a house, he bought a really expensive camera and traveled through Southeast Asia. And for the first time in his life, he had something that was of value on him. And he said it just created a lot of anxiety because he was worried about losing it, of damaging it. So, yeah, it's really important, I think, to get our priorities right when that's around family relationships, and being able to make that call. Ask that question: when is enough? And I think, yeah. So, and you seem to have balanced that really well, John. So something else showed up too that was a challenge. That was a health challenge, wasn't it, that you've shared before?
It was. And I think that, there's a lot of sort of stories about people that work really hard to build a company, and then they retire or sell it, and then short time later they get sick. And so I ended up getting a head tumor, and
Wow.
It was pretty serious. I lost like 50 pounds. I was down to like 135 pounds. And I think at my peak, I was 185, 190. And so I was on the edge. I was frail. Went through 7 weeks of radiation, and I survived, knock on wood. And
Yep.
I think I survived because I became my own advocate for my health. And I think if you ever get ill, it's really important that you become your own advocate. Get educated. Doctors aren't perfect. They practice medicine. They're not perfect with it. And so you need to figure out your best course. And I mixed Western medicine with some Eastern medicine, did some spiritual work. And after getting through that whole process, I think I had a different perspective, or at least a honed perspective of life.
Yep.
And how precious it is. Jeff, you've been through things yourself. You know this story.
Yep.
And so I just said to myself, and I thought that I was just going to sell GoldMine and then, go back and do something else a short time later. But I decided to really dedicate myself to being a parent and being a husband and a present member of my community. And I really focused on one thing, is growing my soul and ultimately helping other people grow theirs. I think that's my recipe for life. I think that we're on this planet for a very small period of time. And I do believe that the essence of yourself continues in the universe, because we're all built of star stuff, and that stuff just goes back into the universe.
Yep.
And that you might come back. And so, each time you're here, work to grow. And I think you do that best by helping other people grow.
Yeah. And, that's what I certainly learned when I started, jeffbullis.com, 11 years ago, actually this month. And I just gave away content for free, trying to, basically, what are people's biggest problems as entrepreneurs, as marketers? How can they grow their business? What are the things that keeps them up at night? And so this podcast, the show, has been created because I wanted to talk to people like yourself and others that can share stories about life, because business and life aren't separate. Money is just part of the equation. It helps you get other stuff and add more value to the world. And that's why I want to do this show. I just wanted to say, okay, it's time in the middle of all this AI, machines, automation, algorithms. I wanted to share stories of humans and entrepreneurs that have got so much to give. And that's, it's just great to hear your perspective regarding what's important to you and how you've navigated that. So thanks for sharing that story about the health scare and the cancer. Something happened to me 2 years ago. I lost my partner, and we're still navigating that. But I really brought home to me what's important, and it comes down to relationships. So the reality is that we've got to really double down on what's important, and also for me, this show's all about relationships and what's not to love about having a fireside chat with you, John. So, and one of the best books I've ever read was The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, and I love the sentence that is the essence of his book. It said, "The past is gone. The future doesn't exist. The only thing you've got is now." So, and that's a challenge for us as humans to actually just double down on now.
Yeah,
And
I agree. So Buddha said the cause of most pain is from hanging on to the past and averting the future. So hanging on to what you want and averting what you don't want is another way to look at it. But ultimately, I think that when you're ruminating on the past or you're fearing what may come, you're not really being here. So you're not actually living the life you have.
That's right.
But when you are here, you see so much richness. It becomes more brighter, right? And so I think that being mindful and present, I know it's such an overused word, but really that's what life's about. Because if you're not here with yourself or the person you're with or the surroundings that are surrounding you, then you're missing it. And so 100% Eckhart Tolle, Power of Now, I think that's the name of the book.
It is.
is one of the great books and so enlightening.
Yeah, it's something that I still need to practice every day. It's being in the present is something.
It absolutely is. Because, I work on meditating each day, but I find sometimes I slip. And I work on being mindful and present. I find that I slip. And so even though we're aware of what we should do, we're humans. We don't do it. And so it's important to constantly come back to it. And not to judge yourself in the process.
And love yourself and be kind to yourself. And and it's certainly something that even just being present by listening rather than actually thinking of what your next piece of the conversation is going to be, being very present with someone as you ask them questions and ask them questions that I think reveal their humanity to you. So it's a challenge every day, I think, for all of us as humans to actually be present and be in the now. And I know I don't do it perfectly at all, and just do my best to actually be in the now as I possibly can, and also be listening to people as best I can. So let's move on to you've overcome the health scare. You spent 10 years being a great dad and husband. So how did Nimble start? What was the inspiration for that?
So I started to remodel our old Spanish home here in Santa Monica, and it was like a 3 or 4 year project. It's a home that was built in 1928. And in the process of doing all that work, I sort of it's like exercising. It was like my product mind started to get in tune again. And so you can imagine the detail, and you can, just look back here, the bookshelves. And if I turn the camera around, I'd show you all these wood things, all this detail. And in the process of managing that, I basically kind of got my product mind back honed. And at the same time, social media hit 2006, 7, 8, and 9. And I started to use it. I remember This Week in Tech had the Twitter founder on there, and they were talking about Twitter. And I said, Twitter, and I went and signed up an account, and I said, hello world, ... right? And so I was just trying to figure these things out. And as I started to surf in the social river, I saw the immense power of social media to connect and communicate and to build community. And you can imagine, I've been out of tech for 10 years, so my brand was like nothing. And so I had to sort of reestablish my brand and relationships. And as I started to use social media, and I saw I was going to change the way that we work, play, buy, and sell, I started to build relationships and connections. And I wanted to take those relationships and connections I was building and to manage them, to nurture them. Because it's hard to manage like names in Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. And so I found Hootsuite that enabled me to manage these columns of conversations.
Yep.
They didn't tie back to contacts, to connections. And what I wanted to do before I met with somebody is I Google them so I know who they are and what they're about, what their business is, et cetera. And I think it's your job. In the old days, I used to teach people when you go into somebody's office, look at their walls, look at the books they read, the degree of the school they went to, the knickknacks, to find what you have in common, because we connect on the areas of commonality. I call that the 5 F's of life: family, friend, food, fun, and fellowship. And so I looked for a tool to manage relationships. I couldn't find it as far as social. And then I started looking at contact management, and I saw it was broken because Gmail and G Suite was the cloud contact manager, and email, contact, and calendar are 3 separate programs. And you want to have your email and your calendar connected to the contacts, and ideally the social as well. And then I started looking at CRM and saw it wasn't about relationships. It was really about reporting. And the reason they call it Salesforce, you have to force salespeople to use it. Nobody in the right mind would use a CRM if they weren't beat on to use it. And I saw the opportunity to reimagine contact management and CRM with a platform that automatically builds itself from the data you already have, which is your contacts in Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Gmail, and G Suite. And so I put together a team and we built Nimble.
And yeah, you've basically taken what you learnt in the previous 10 years before you took your sabbatical.
Yeah.
And you just reimagined it in the social media world. And just like you, back in 2008, 2009, I just saw what was unfolding in front of me, Twitter conversations. And for me, it was late at night watching America wake up on Twitter. That's really what it was. And I remember just some of the contacts and connections I made back then, still with me today. I remember being interviewed, or not interviewed, but being introduced when I was speaking in Knoxville, Tennessee about 7 years ago.
Mark Schaefer?
Yeah, Mark Schaefer's social media summit, whatever he called it back then. And I was introduced by a lady I'd met 2-3 years earlier on a late night conversation on Twitter. And she talked about she had lost her hamsters and couldn't find them. And it was just an inane, funny conversation we had. And she actually ended up introducing me at Mark's conference. So the connections for me over the years have just been amazing. And I think what you did is you actually identified a problem with social media, in that it was like herding cats and disorganized. And you said, okay, how can I get it disorganized? I remember when I started using automation for Twitter and so on, it was just, it was Wild West.
Yeah.
So you identified a problem again and went, okay, and then reimagined it, okay, social CRM. So now you've had a few challenges with Nimble since the idea was inspired by your observation of social media. So tell a little bit about what happened after you said, I need to do a social CRM. So how'd you get going?
So I put together a team. I funded it myself, and we began to build the core platform. And I imagined, so if you think about the way that you used to manage social, you used to go to Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn, or maybe something like Hootsuite to manage the conversations. And I imagine, and then you go into email and Gmail, and you go into your Gmail calendar, and all these different programs. I imagine sort of bring it all together into one sort of dashboard, if you will. And but to do that, I needed the access to the API. So Facebook had an open API, Twitter had an open API, LinkedIn did not have an open API to the level that I needed it. And what I wanted was full access to contact synchronization, signals on posts and responses, the ability to do private messages on all the platforms, and the ability to sync contacts and enrich those contacts. And so I went up to LinkedIn and built relationships with their management team, and they gave me access to their public and their private APIs. So I had the ability to look up an email and enrich a contact, to be able to sync the private messages, the notifications, everything. And I effectively pioneered social CRM and social selling before any of it existed. And we just took off like a rocket ship until the API wars. And the API wars were Facebook cut off the API originally because they wanted you to go live in Facebook. It was all about the advertising. Right. It wasn't about security. it was about advertising. LinkedIn cut off the API because they wanted to sell you LinkedIn Navigator. And so I had to sort of walk through the desert for a while like Jesus and reimagine what Nimble was going to be. But I think there's an important part of the whole story that I forgot to sort of mention that I think has parallels to how I built GoldMine. And that is, I'm sitting there in the beginning of GoldMine, I'm Nimble, actually from this desk here, because we worked out of my garage, which is down below us. And I had to build the Nimble brand and bring it to market. And so how did I do that? I identified the influence of my prospect in and around the areas of promise of its products and services, social, sales, and marketing, influencers, and thought leaders. And I began to share their content on my brand and the Nimble brand, and then hashtag it appropriately and attribute their name, and then engage with the people that responded, especially the influencer and their community, and then invited those people for conversations and built relationships where those influencers became Nimble users and are storytellers. And if you think about it, that's the exact same way we built GoldMine, is by identifying the influencer of our prospect. Back in the old days, it was the Novell reseller. So I think that's a critical aspect of how we built the Nimble brand. And then we did the same thing with press and analysts, where we got them, we told them stories and they started to write stories about it. We won awards and all that. And so that gets us to, you know, when we got our first 100,000 subscribers and we lost the API. So what do we do? So right about that time, Microsoft came out with Office 365. And as we started to integrate into the Office 365 APIs, because if you're a business and you want to run productivity, you need to pick Office or G Suite now for email, contact, and calendar and productivity apps. And so I said to myself, the most important signals you'll ever have is the contacts you're connecting to, the conversations you're having in email, and the activities that you drive in your calendar. So email, contact, and calendar are the base business signals, and they'll never take those APIs away. And so we doubled down on the basics, and we bet the farm on Microsoft, because I saw that Microsoft ate Novell by coming out with NT Server 3 years after Novell came out with Novell, and Office came out 3 years after G Suite came out. And I knew that Office would eat G Suite. So we began to build integrations with the Microsoft products, relationships with the people, which gave us access to the programs. And 6 months ago, Microsoft signed a global reseller agreement with Nimble. They're our global reseller. We don't have to sign a contract with their distributors. They're walking us into the top 50 distributors. They're paying the distributors to push us through their resellers. We've signed up over 1,000 resellers. And recently, Microsoft sunsetted their simple CRM and transitioned 200,000 of their customers to us, which essentially anoints Nimble as the simple CRM for Office 365, which kind of, if you think about it, we just repeated history.
You have, and that's why reading your story about GoldMine and having our conversations over the years are going, John's basically taken a template and just reinvented it for a social media world. And it's a fantastic story, John. And now there's one little question I have. So LinkedIn got bought by Microsoft.
Yes.
So how did that sort of API, LinkedIn, Microsoft play out?
So I haven't gone back to LinkedIn to sort of start that conversation, only because LinkedIn still is very focused on LinkedIn Sales Navigator.
Okay.
But I do have good relationships with the LinkedIn people. And because they are part of Microsoft, I anticipate that we'll reestablish that and get access to the APIs. But it's not like LinkedIn's going to let us get access to the deep level that we used to. What it'll probably be is if you're a Nimble subscriber and a LinkedIn Sales Navigator subscriber, that there'll be certain information that will be surfaced within Nimble that you maybe can't get today, which says, okay, so you subscribe to them both, which many of our customers do that. They use Nimble and they use LinkedIn Sales Navigator. And so I was happy to see Microsoft buy LinkedIn. LinkedIn still run as an independent company. Jeff Weiner, the CEO, just left. And maybe there might be a deeper sort of, integration, which I do see with some of their products, a deeper LinkedIn integration. But I anticipate that Nimble and LinkedIn will get cozy again in the not too near future.
Okay, cool. So what some of the questions I do like to ask is, what are some of your favorite resources, such as books that you found inspiring and over the years?
So, my Bible in building GoldMine was Think and Grow Rich. I think it's a book
Okay.
that most of the entrepreneurs that I know who retired at 40, say that was their book. Of course, winning friends and influencing people, classic book.
Yeah, they're
But there's
classics. Yeah.
but there's other books that I really, in fact, I have a series of them here. So here's my Think and Grow Rich book.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
But I actually have an older one. This one here, Padahasma Yogananda was a philosopher that I started to read early on. Is a book called Autobiography of a Yogi. But Self-Realization Center is a place here in Los Angeles.
So that book's called Man's Eternal Quest. Is that what the title was?
Yes. But there's a book called Autobiography of a Yogi that
Okay.
I'd recommend. And then I'm looking for some of the other books, but there they are. So there's a book that I really love called Guerrilla Marketing,
Yes.
and the 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing that were really great for me back in the day. These are sort of older titles because I'm an older dude. And a book called Strategic Selling that was really great back in the day. So these are some books that I recommend that are sort of foundational from a business perspective. Also, a book called Siddhartha with Hermann Hesse, I think is a really good book about the journey of life.
Right.
And making decisions at certain aspects of that life. Have you read Siddhartha?
I haven't read that one. I have heard of it, but I haven't read it. So
I recommend it.
yeah, typically what I do is when I have these conversations, I normally jot down 4 or 5 books and actually I go straight on Amazon Kindle and actually just download them pretty well within hours. So
And
yeah.
there's another one that I actually like too. I'm looking to see if I have it on my desk. It is The New Rules of PR and Marketing by David Meerman Scott. He also did The New Rules of Sales and Service. But I really like the books that David puts out.
Yeah, David's book, The New Rules of Marketing and PR, that I read in 2008, was an inspiration for me actually to start the blog. And
it was actually an inspiration for me to start Nimble.
Wow. Okay. That's cool. And what was interesting is about 3 or 4 years ago, Dave was over here at a Tony Robbins event speaking, up running a workshop. And a friend of mine introduced me to him at a lunch. And in fact, David and I had been chatting over the years via email and Twitter. And it was so good to get to see him because we actually had been in touch, but now we've become good friends. And I said to him, he was my inspiration, one of my inspirations to actually start, publishing online and, inbound marketing, as we called it back then. Now it's sort of called content marketing. So that's fascinating actually to hear that he was inspiration for you as well. But
yeah, and the thing is that some of my walks that I've done with you and people like David are some of my favorite moments. Because the thing is that I think that there's a lot of these relationships that sort of start softly on Twitter, and then maybe they shift over to email and LinkedIn connection. But if you really want to build a relationship, and that's like capital REAL, relationship, you need to take it to face to face. And that's why I dug that walk on the beach that we did, and the walks that I've done with David, and I make it a point when we're at the same conference, he does the Microsoft conference sometimes, that get together, because I think it's important to keep that continuation. There's a formula for how much gas it takes for a rocket to get to orbit or for a car to get to 60 miles an hour, and the bulk of the fuel is getting up to speed. But maintaining the speed is far less fuel, and the same philosophy with relationships.
Yeah, exactly. And I do remember that special time I dropped into Santa Monica, and we went for a long walk down to the Santa Monica beach, and we chatted, and we dropped in for a beer at one of the beachside cafes. And I will remember that for a long time. It was just a beautiful afternoon. I was on my way back from social media marketing world and said, why don't I drop in and say hi to Jon? And he gave me some insights into what we're talking about today. And the other fun part, fun fact here for Jon, for people to know about Jon, is that he bought an actor's house in Los Angeles. So Jack Nicholson apparently had the house. You bought it off Jack, is that correct, Jon?
Well, I bought it from Jack's people. I actually never got to meet Jack.
Right, okay. So your people spoke to his people. Okay, right, so fantastic. But you totally remodeled it, so it's a beautiful home there in Santa Monica. But these are the sort of fun things you don't discover until you actually sort of drop in and say, hi, I'm here. So, and it was a great walk. So I suppose just to wrap things up, Jon, you looks like you got Nimble really pumping. 200,000 new customers just handed over to you from Microsoft, retiring their simple CRM. So what is 2 or 3 things that you'd like to share with other entrepreneurs that are maybe wanting to start or are already on the journey? What's 2 or 3 lessons that you'd like to share that you've learned over the last 2 or 3 decades?
I think number one is if you're getting into entrepreneurship to make money, I think you're really going about it the wrong way. I think that if you're going to get into entrepreneurship, that you have to have a passion. And for me, it's always been a problem that I have. And I think that the best entrepreneurs are fixing problems that they have because they're passionate about it and they understand the problem. And so I call it my 3 Ps of life. Figure out what your passion is, build a plan to achieve it, make it your purpose on a daily basis. And that's sort of been a recipe for success for me. And the funny thing is, Jeff, I didn't become an entrepreneur because I wanted to make $1 million. I did it because I dug it. I dug what I was doing. Mm-hmm. I friggin' love technology and I love to synthesize net new solutions. And my biggest solution that I've done all of my life is managing relationships because they're messy and they're sticky and it's hard to do it on paper. And so my one thing I want you to remember is don't start a business because you want to make $1 million. Start a business because you want to change the world. And then the other thing is that life really isn't about money. I've made money many times over. And I think it's really about making memories out of moments. And that's why it's so important to be truly present with others and with yourself and with the universe around you. And for me, I think it's important to continue to grow. And that's why I love to learn. And that's why I work on growing my soul. It's something I try to do regularly, is being present with myself, doing some meditation, and being present with others. Jeff, if you are truly present with people who love you, they'll reflect your shit back at you. And if you're willing to look at your shit in life and work on it, that's how you grow as a human being. And I don't know if you've ever experienced that, where you see your kid or somebody you love and they're doing something and it's just like, oh my God, that bugs me. Oh my God, that's me.
Yeah, it's like looking in the mirror. And I suppose one of the challenges I had as I looked at my, one of my biggest pivots was my dad was a very good talker, but his superpower wasn't listening. And I had a relationship breakup, in my 20s. And I went, you know what, I actually need to work on this listening stuff. In other words, I really want to be present with someone to find out what is their secret sauce, what gets them motivated. For me, I did a 6-month course on communication skills. Still work in progress, but the reality was that being present by just listening and just being there and hearing their soul, hearing their fears, hearing their joys, I think that's where we really get down to building those deep connections, and that's what I love as well. So thank you, Jon, for sharing your life, your journey, and your stories. I'm honoured that you were able to do that today. And thank you very much for sharing. I look forward to our next walk down to Santa Monica Beach and sharing a beer again. I'm looking forward to it.
Let's do that soon, Jeff.
We will. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Jon. That was.
Thanks, Jeff. Sorry that we had a little burp with the internet, but you'll be able to edit that out. Probably.
Yeah, I'll get my people to sort it out.
That was really great. I enjoyed the conversation. Is there anything that I could be doing to blow wind in your sails these days?
This podcast is one of my 2 projects that I'm launching this year. So this is a 6-month sort of get it rocking and rolling.
Okay. So why don't you send Michaela and copy me like when you're doing the releases, like when you're posting them, so that we could amplify them?
Yep. Yeah. Great. Thank you very much. And we haven't launched it yet. So this is my 5th interview. I've got episode 0, which is where I introduce the show and my story. So we're looking at launching by the end of March, and we actually going to turn this into videos as well, because that's why we're recording this. And the whole purpose of this podcast is to build relationships. And what's better than, having a fireside chat with you. And it's been fabulous. I've just loved it. And I want to share the stories of entrepreneurs and people to the rest of the world, so we can help them be better people and better business people that change the world. I think that's what this podcast is about. And it was time to get out from behind the page and actually, bring people and interview them and chat to them. So that's what we're doing. It's really about shining a light on the heroes and heroines.
Awesome. Well, Jeff, great connecting with you today. Yep. May I say that you look spectacular, my friend?
Thank you.
And let's connect soon, face to face.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Jeff.
Bye.